Stephen, we're here today to discuss the problem that we've seen in our community where the coroner of Quebec has just released a statement regarding the death of Éloïse Dupuis, and she was one of Jehovah's Witnesses who died just over a year ago. And I believe you had written an article in the Freedom of Mind website that you author, and in it you discussed right after her death the fact that she was somehow influenced by Jehovah's Witnesses to make the decision to refuse blood. Now, we've recently received the coroner's report a year later, and in that coroner's report, he did establish the fact that Éloïse Dupuis did die of lack of blood to her vital organs. However, he also stated that he didn't feel that there was undue influence over her decision to do so since she is an adult. And I wanted to ask you, why is it that you think the coroner is not aware of the fact that Éloïse was unduly influenced? And maybe you could tell the public, was she in fact influenced to make this decision?
Well, so let's just start with I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in Massachusetts, and I have been writing different books on this subject of cults and brainwashing and mind control and undue influence, and that I'm currently a doctoral student at Fielding University with a focus of wanting to do my dissertation on doing scientific research to demonstrate that there is a model, Shefflin's social influence model, in fact, that can utilize the bite model and other important models to flesh out in a legal context what undue influence has been exerted in any particular case. Now, I'd like to start by just saying that undue influence is a 500-year-old legal construct from England. It had to do with elderly people being taken over and exploited by caretakers who got them to sign over their inheritance to the caretaker and disinheriting the children and the likely heirs to the estate. So it's a very well-known principle of exploitation of power over someone who's vulnerable by someone who has an agenda. So with that as a frame, what people need to understand is that we really have had a revolution in understanding how the mind works, how social psychology works, how people come to be influenced unconsciously to make decisions that they think are independent, but in fact they've been completely contrived or manipulated by the context. And in the case of someone who's actually been born and raised inside of a total belief system group like the Watchtower Society, I would argue, if I had the opportunity in a court of law as an expert or etc., that one would need to question whether or not she was in fact deciding to refuse to take blood and die and leave her child motherless, or whether or not she had been indoctrinated and inculcated with irrational fears known as phobias, whether or not she was conditioned to be obedient and dependent on what her authority figures told her God wanted her to do. So this process of undue influence can be actually broken down into pieces. And I believe if somebody steps back from any environment, they can look at behavioral control elements, information control elements, thought control elements, and emotional control elements all combined to create an identity that is dependent and obedient on the pyramid structure. And in the case of the Watchtower, straight to the governing body, who claim that they speak for Jehovah God himself.
Yeah, it seems that we have a little bit of a conflict going on with the understanding of First Amendment rights in the United States, for example. which gives religions the right to have their own, what they call zone of autonomy, and practice the free will of their beliefs. Yet at the same time, we do see that the government will intervene in the case of minors. So, for example, if Eloise had been a minor, either in Canada or in the United States, and she needed a medical procedure, whether it was a blood transfusion or some other procedure banned by her church, in this case, Jehovah's Witnesses, we do see that the government would step in. However, once she passes that age of maturity, or the age by which she's declared no longer a minor, then suddenly the burden falls completely on her to make that decision as an adult, and the witnesses are free, or any church is free, to continue that influence over the person.
So words are important, and I would assert that to make a decision, one has to have information that involves choices. And in the mind of somebody in the Watchtower, the only choice was to do what she believed God wants her to do, which was refuse the blood and die. It was, in other words, if we step back from the Watchtower for a moment and think about the people who were in the Heaven's Gate cult, who believed that they were beaming up to a spaceship in the tail of the Hale-Bopp comet in 1997, and in their mind they were evacuating the Earth because it was going to be disintegrated. They were not committing suicide. They thought people who were not doing this act to go up to the spaceship, they were committing suicide. So their reality in their mind, and versus what we know as the reality, is that people leave the Watchtower all the time and they don't blow up and they don't die, and they realize they can have a life of faith in God. Many of them study the scripture and actually realize that the whole mistranslation of the Torah, the Old Testament, around the term "do not eat of the blood," and they wake up and they go, "Oh, they were wrong." But I want to come back to a very central point that you raised about freedom of religion. Now, I would argue that when people from Jehovah's Witness group go door to door and they say, "I'd like to study the Bible with you," because they're not disclosing, they're not using the same Bible that other Christians use. They use the New World Translation that has been refuted by every legitimate theologian, Jewish or Christian. They are lying to the people who are being recruited. They are defrauding them and depriving them of their religious freedom through this lie.
I suppose the question you would ask, though, would be, do they fully understand that they're lying or telling this?
So that's a different question. And I would say, as a former member of a cult, the Moonies, I didn't think of what I was doing when I was lying as lying, because reality was redefined as the whole world is satanic, we are of God, and we are actually rescuing people from Satan. So I was not thinking my own thoughts of, this is not factually correct, this is actually a lie. I was thinking, I have to do what God needs me to do to save these people because they're being influenced by this evil force, Satan.
Right. So it really raises the question, at what point can the government step in and override those beliefs if the government comes to understand that these beliefs are destructive to a person's well-being?
So it really, for me, that's again what I'm doing this whole work, why I've created a nonprofit division called Freedom from Undue Influence. We really have the science now to spell out the differences between ethical influence and unethical influence, and to go through the specific criteria, and that people can actually be challenged in terms of, are you able to think for yourself, or are you just following what you've been programmed to believe?
So if you were to make a statement, if the coroner of Quebec happened to be watching this and he's already made his statement that he doesn't believe that there's necessarily undue influence on the part of Éloïse, who was an adult when she died, what would you say to the coroner or to any medical professional that believes that a person has not been unduly influenced?
So there are many, many arguments, many points. I would start, I mentioned members of Heaven's Gate. I can talk to you about sex trafficking survivors that I'd work with who were deceptively recruited by pimps, drugged, raped, threatened, beaten, tortured, branded, had multiple STDs, who were arrested and who said to the police, I'm with him of my own free will. I love him. This is the life that I have chosen to live. Leave me alone. But once you get them away from the controller, and once you educate them about brainwashing and mind control and what the bite model is, and they're given an option that they can actually leave the pimp and that he won't track them down and kill them or threaten their families, then they wake up and they say, thank you for rescuing me. So that's one argument that I would say. But there really is a body of research now. In my freedomofmind.com blog, I wrote about, for example, a divorce attorney who is in jail now for 12 years because he was covertly hypnotizing his female clients, raping them, and then programming them to forget what he did to them. And we have 45, I think 46 victims who've come forward. This was a documented case where he was recorded doing this assault and battery and rape. But this is outside the current model of the law of terms of understanding how people can be manipulated and mind controlled. But it's a reality.
Right. So now you've written Combating Mind Control and other books.
Combating Cult Mind Control and Freedom of Mind, yes.
Right. So that would be my next question is, how can people reach out to you and get in contact with you to better understand what they can do about undue influence and mind control?
So we have the freedomofmind.com website, and we have the freedomfromundueinfluence.org website. And I've been on many, many television shows and interviewed and in documentaries, and I have a lot of video interviews that are up in lectures and workshops. Just in the last 2 months, I did psychiatry grand rounds at Harvard Medical School, and I also was invited to speak about combating cult mind control at the Ralph Bunche Library at the U.S. State Department. So I'm an activist. I am trying to raise awareness. In order to have freedom of mind, one needs to control one's own mind, and that includes reality testing, asking critical questions, and thinking about what is real and what is true. And I also want to add, I'm a spiritual person, and the last thing I want in the world is to interfere with religious freedom. But I believe religious freedom means following out of faith and not out of mind control and not out of slavery. And that if a group is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. So if you really believe that you're following God and following the Bible, then step out, learn about the bite model and mind control, talk to critics and former members, reflect over your own experience, and then you're in a position to say that I'm going to think about and exercise my own free will.
Those are excellent points. And you mentioned speaking at Harvard. One question I wanted to ask you is, of course, when you speak to adults, it's different than speaking to persons who are still experiencing their growth potential, young people in elementary and middle school and even high school. How do you propose that we reach out to those whose minds are still developing and get this information into their minds that they do have a choice despite what their religious belief structure is impressing on them when they go back to their homes?
That's a great question. So I am a big advocate of the openmindsfoundation.org, whose focus is to do preventive education, especially with young people. I'm on the board of advisors for something called the childfriendlyfaith.org website that is wanting to get religious best practices in place. That means making sure children have access to medical treatment, they are protected from pedophiles, and to protect them from corporal punishment, which is a thing that I haven't mentioned yet about the Watchtower Society. But the physical discipline and the punishing that is the norm in that organization, there is well-established research that demonstrate it's very harmful to young people to physically punish them and beat them. And it causes trauma, it causes harm, and it interferes with their ability to grow in a healthy manner. Not to mention being programmed about Armageddon at every second.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that one thing most of our viewers may not realize is the fact that on their open policy, the Watchtower organization and perhaps other religions state that they don't advocate for corporal punishment in the homes, that they don't support it, but behind closed doors, it's just the opposite. And I think that maybe you can comment on how this education really is going to help people recognize that what they preach on paper and what they actually practice behind closed doors may in fact be two different things.
Right. So one of the things about destructive organizations that are destructive cults, totalist organizations, unfortunately, is they lie to the outside world about what's really going on the inside. And that's why the internet had such a revolutionary effect on people in destructive cults, because people could actually look at the literature published by their own group from its origins and compare it with what the teachings are today and see that things are absolutely different than what the elders or the leaders are wanting them to know about. But I do want to come back for 1 second to say about children, educating children about how the mind works and about social psychology. When my son was in elementary school, he was being taught about bullying. And on a certain level, destructive cult leaders bully normal people into following and doing what they want them to do. So in my work, I'm often citing the Zimbardo prison study, the Milgram obedience study, the Solomon Asch conformity study, things that educate people about how the mind works and how to maintain your own integrity. And I guess I want to add, my mentor, Phil Zimbardo, has this wonderful heroicimagination.org project, which is around the world, actually, educating people to be a hero, which for him means step up and do the right thing. And in a very simplistic definition, to take the mindset that if I was in that situation, what would I want people to do for me? And if the answer is help me or call the police or step up for me, then if that's the answer, then you should do it for them. And to have that kind of compassionate responsibility to others in the world.
Well, that's terrific. And I know that these outreach programs do work. I've personally been in touch with police corporals that work on child abuse cases, and they have come back to me and stated, well, you know, the information that you told me about Jehovah's Witnesses and about undue influence actually helped them in a case where they were dealing with a 17-year-old girl who was disfellowshipped by the Jehovah's Witness organization. And, you know, she expressed when they got her alone, spoke to the police corporal, she expressed that she wanted out. And this was something, these were resources that were not available to me when I was growing up because I grew up under that same environment. So
Right.
now we have police, we have teachers who can educate their children on what what the truth is about undue influence, and we're hoping to get that in the school systems. And thanks to you, we have the Freedom of Mind Foundation and the Freedom of Mind website, as well as the Open Minds Foundation. And wherever this is posted, I think we'll post links to those websites so that
Yes,
you can find
and thanks for all your good work, Mark. It's been amazing how many people you've helped. You're wonderful. You're tireless.
Well, it's a certainly a community effort, as they say. It takes a village to get these things done. So
It does indeed. And former members actually are the best advocates if they get the healing, if they get strong and get clear-minded about what is the education that needs to happen to people who've never been there. And honestly, when my book first came out in 1988, it was former Jehovah's Witness people who read it, people like Randall Waters, who said, you wrote a fantastic book. How come you didn't mention the Watchtower? And I was like, why? And he was like, are you kidding? I underlined your entire book. And I said, teach me. And he said, come to LA and I'll get a group of ex-members together. And so began my education, and that was 1989. And I've been fortunate to help many people who've read my book and who I've been able to counsel and help heal from the Watchtower Society over the decades.
Well, that's a terrific point, because I think we have many groups that are really sliding under the radar and are not considered to be, outward cults like the Heaven's Gate, or like what happened with David Koresh and Waco, and
Right.
but they, are much larger groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses, and also the Orthodox Jewish community, where we see quite a bit of
The ultra-Orthodox, I would add.
ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic, where we have a lot of cover-up of child sexual abuse cases.
Right. The more a group says the world is black and white, us versus them, good versus evil, if you're in, you're good, if you're out, you're bad, that tell people they can't read books, they can't go on the internet, they can't talk to former members or critics, they're exercising censorship. They're exercising information control, which undercuts the whole ability to make a decision for yourself. Because if you don't have information, how can you make a decision to do anything but what you're being controlled and told you have to do? So
there's a tremendous irony there in the fact that groups like Jehovah's Witnesses say that you should study and learn, and that you should examine the truth to see whether or not these things are so. That's one of the scriptures.
Every cult says that. Come on.
Right.
Say that. The Scientologists say the very same words. Just check it out. If you don't like it, you can leave. Check it out. It all stands up to scrutiny, but it doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Well, that brings us full circle back to the case of Éloïse Dupuis and the fact that, she lost her life. And what's interesting about that and sad is the fact that if she had removed herself from the Jehovah's Witness structure, and when I say structure, her husband is a devout Jehovah's Witness. Her father is a very well-respected Jehovah's Witness, and her mother. Her father is actually one of the few Jehovah's Witness elders in the Quebec area that's allowed to perform marriage ceremonies, because in that country, not all elders,
right,
like they are here, are allowed to give marriage ceremonies or do the marriage vows. But in that case, if she had left the organization, they would have considered her disassociated, as if she made the decision herself to leave. But that would have left her with complete shunning from her friends, her family. She would have lost everything, all of her social structure.
Yeah, but I would argue that if she wasn't surrounded by members of the organization, and if she had access to people like myself and former members and ministers who know the Bible, who appealed to her to pray to God directly and ask God, what did God want her baby to have no mother? At least she would have had a smidgen of an opportunity to have a choice. In my opinion, she didn't have a choice. She was in a closed environment. She had doctors, but she'd already been programmed to avoid that from birth, from her childhood, to avoid doctors who were going to tell her to have a blood transfusion.
Right.
In any case, I need to to sign off, but I thank you very much for this.
Yeah, Stephen, it's terrific. Thank you for taking the time to discuss this issue, and we'll post the links to your website, and thanks for all you do. And
Pleasure.
talking
Thanks.
to you.
Keep up the good work. Let's help as many people as we can.
Likewise. Thank you.